Deion Sanders up there in Colorado, savior of the program, king of the NIL, father of the Heisman candidate, the man who's attracting more attention than God or any of the 14ers out there in Denver, bringing his program back from the dead to new heights. Well, until they play games. And then all of a sudden they're mediocre with occasional doses of crappiness. But yesterday was different to me, very different. I realized and read that over the weekend, news came out that Deion Sanders has banned a columnist. His name is Sean Keeler of the Denver Post. But that Deion Sanders has banned Keeler from asking Sanders questions. Keeler covers the Colorado Buffaloes as a member of the Denver Post. Now, don't worry. He can keep his credentials. And don't worry, he's allowed to go to games, thank God. He's allowed to go to practices, few. He's allowed to be in scrums. However, you may not ask any questions. How did this happen? Well, it turns out that Sean Keeler apparently made some personal attacks on Deion, name-calling, referring to him in previous articles as false prophet or deposition Deion, Planet Prime, the Bruce Lee of BS. And apparently Deion had his feelings hurt. There's a man who was a reporter for the Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel, I believe. His name was Mike Berardino. You may not know that name, and I don't know if he's still working. He had switched up into Minnesota, Coca. He left the Florida beat and moved to Minnesota, I think, to work for the Tribune. Mike Berardino wrote a scathing article about our organization when we switched from the Expos to the Marlins. It was the cover of Baseball America. I believe the cover had a hanging Youppi and some sort of Billy the Marlin cartoon. Of course, I don't blame him for the cover, but we certainly blamed him for the contents of the article where he gave voice to the aggrieved employees as part of that historic swap transaction in 2002 that found John Henry selling the Marlins and buying the Red Sox, and Jeffrey Loria selling the Expos and buying the Marlins, and Major League Baseball buying the Expos. There was an article that basically took a day. That's an exaggeration. It took maybe 3 hours of my life when it came out to deal with the ramifications of it. Found out immediately who the sources were and knew who the people quoted were, and it all made sense to me how Berardino got his facts wrong. He refused to apologize. For the rest of my career, we put a ban on Mike Berardino. But we didn't tell anyone that. We just didn't talk to him. We let our scouts talk to him when he was doing prospect articles. We let people in development talk to him when talking about minor leaguers. But our GM, Larry Beinfest at the time, then Mike Hill, myself, we always were very clear. If you want to ask us a question, go ahead and ask it. We're just not going to answer it. And we're going to answer it in whichever way we want if we do answer it, and it won't be the question you ask. There are ways to deal with a media member you don't want to deal with, but going public or having it be known that there is a member of the media that you will not allow to ask you a question, I don't like the fact that Deion went public with it. But then what happened is we found out another piece of information, and this one will blow your mind as it did mine. His contract, according to the Denver Post, Deion Sanders, when he came to Colorado, his contract states that he will only be required to speak to members of the media that are mutually agreed upon by Deion and Colorado. Mutually agreed upon media, which means if Deion doesn't want to talk to someone, he does not have to. That sort of contractual provision should never have been allowed by the Board of Regents or by the president of Colorado, no matter how desperate you are to have a coach. That is a provision I would never, ever allow into a contract that I was a part of as president of a team, nor would I make a demand of such contract if I were a coach, GM, or president of a team. One thing that we try to do with members of the media is we don't try to empower them too much. The irony of where I sit now is not lost upon me. We don't try to empower them. This action, this clause, this provision is an empowering provision. Is Deion so spineless, scared, and insecure that he needs to agree which members of the media he's going to speak to? He doesn't know anything about any of these members of the media, so he just gets to decide, if you write a bad thing, I'm going to cut you off. Is that doing justice to what the media is there to do, which is to report and to opine? The good news is the Keeler will be credentialed. Thank God. The bad news is that there's been a precedent set that somehow college coaches, first of all, side note, Coca, in the big leagues, managers don't get that right. Forget as a contractual right. They, after a bad game where they've been walked off because their closer stinks, they must meet the media. It is the rule. There is no exception. You can delay it. Normally, it's 10 minutes after the game ends. You want to make it 20 because you're getting rid of players or getting yelled at by your president or owner or GM. Fine. But the clubhouse can't stay closed forever. You meet the media before games and after games. Hard stop. The possibility of deciding who can be there and who can't. Now, we could decide on who to credential in terms of bloggers when that was starting, in terms of people who are not BBWAA. Were there times when we would not want to give a credential to someone? Yeah. Were there times when it happened? Very, very rarely. But these college coaches are making these choices, and then it becomes public, and oh, forget it, Coca. Let's move on. Do you know why? Because people in college aren't students, they're employees. And they're not young athletes, they're professionally paid athletes. So I guess it doesn't much matter setting an example or being a fatherly figure or taking care of the kids. I forgot. None of that matters. All right, we don't have to deal with that.